One of the most challenging parts of any workplace investigation is resolving conflicting accounts. In many cases, investigators are faced with situations where one person says one thing, another person says something completely different, and there appears to be no obvious answer. However, professional investigations cannot end with a simple he said, she said conclusion. The investigator's role is to carefully analyze the competing accounts, evaluate the supporting evidence, and determine which explanation is more likely to be true, based on the balance of probabilities. The first step in resolving conflicting accounts is to separate what we know from what remains uncertain. Investigators should identify the facts that are not in dispute and the facts that are in dispute. Facts that are not in dispute are usually supported by multiple sources or objective evidence. For example, a meeting occurred on a certain date, an email was sent, or an employee was present at a particular location. These facts provide the foundation for the investigation. Facts in dispute are the areas where accounts differ. For example, two witnesses may agree that a conversation occurred, but disagree about what was said, who initiated it, or how people responded. These disputed points require closer analysis. A useful approach is to organize disputed information chronologically. By creating a timeline or sequence of events, investigators can compare different versions of what happened at each point in time. This helps identify exactly where accounts begin to differ and allows investigators to focus on the key areas of disagreement. Every important fact should also be connected to supporting evidence. Instead of simply stating, "The witness said this happened," investigators should be able to explain what evidence supports or challenges that statement. This creates a clear reasoning path and allows others reviewing the investigation to understand how the conclusion was reached. When comparing different accounts, investigators must also understand that not every inconsistency has the same importance. Human memory is imperfect. People may make mistakes about minor details, such as exact dates, small descriptions, or how long an event lasted. These types of differences are often considered minor inconsistencies and do not necessarily affect the overall reliability of the account. In fact, a completely identical and perfectly detailed story may sometimes raise questions about whether the account has been rehearsed. However, some inconsistencies are more significant. Material inconsistencies involve important facts that directly affect the allegation, such as who was present, what was said, what actions occurred, or the sequence of major events. One important issue investigators should consider is unexplained gaps in a person's account, sometimes referred to as missing time. If a person cannot explain their actions during a critical period when an important event occurred, that gap may require further investigation. Another important consideration when resolving conflicting accounts is whether witnesses have influenced each other's statements. In workplace investigations, people may discuss events with coworkers before interviews take place. Sometimes this happens naturally, but it can also result in witnesses unintentionally aligning their stories. Investigators should pay attention to signs that accounts may have been influenced by others. For example, multiple witnesses using exactly the same unusual wording, identical descriptions, or highly structured responses may suggest that they have discussed the matter extensively. At the same time, investigators must also recognize the difference between coordination and genuine agreement. When independent witnesses who have no reason to influence each other provide similar accounts, this can provide strong corroboration. The key question is whether the similarity comes from shared experience or from shared preparation. To reduce the risk of influence, investigators should, where possible, interview witnesses separately and ask whether they have discussed the incident with other individuals. After analyzing competing accounts, the investigator must explain why one version of events is preferred over another. A professional investigation report should never simply state, "The complainant was believed," or "The respondent was not credible." The report must explain the reasoning behind that conclusion. An account may be preferred because it is more consistent with objective evidence, better supported by independent witnesses, more logical in the circumstances, or more consistent with the overall evidence. The investigator should explain how different pieces of evidence were weighed and why one explanation is more probable than another. Factors such as motive should also be considered carefully. For example, A person facing potential disciplinary consequences may have a reason to minimize or deny certain actions. However, motive alone does not prove dishonesty. It is simply one factor that must be considered together with all other evidence. In some investigations, conflicts cannot be completely resolved. Even after reviewing all available information, the evidence may not clearly support one version over another. In these situations, the investigator may reach an inconclusive finding. An inconclusive finding does not mean that nothing happened. It means that the available evidence does not allow the investigator to conclude that one explanation is more likely than another based on the required standard of proof. When this occurs, the investigator should clearly document why the conflict could not be resolved. The report should identify the competing evidence, explain the limitations, and describe any unanswered questions. Documenting unresolved conflicts remains valuable. Investigation records may become important in the future if similar concerns arise. A properly documented investigation creates an organizational record that can help identify patterns, recurring issues, or broader risks over time. Ultimately, resolving conflicting accounts is about disciplined analysis. Investigators are not expected to eliminate every uncertainty. They are expected to carefully evaluate the evidence, explain their reasoning, and reach conclusions that are fair, transparent, and defensible.